Hello and welcome to Civic Spaces, the podcast from the European Civic Forum, where we sit down with those fighting for systemic change in Europe and beyond. Today, in the second episode of our series on the Civic Pride Awards, we focus on the movement for the rights of the Sámi, Europe's only recognised indigenous people. First, we hear from Anja Márjá Nystø Keskitalo from the Saami Council, one of the co-awardees. Then, we bring you an in-depth interview with Sámi activist Martina Fjällberg. I'm joined now by my colleague Kerttu Willamo, who conducted the interview with Martina alone after my internet totally crashed. Sorry about that, Kerttu, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Ben. Nice to be here with you.
So, Kerttu, do you want to just tell us a little bit about what we're going to hear in this episode and maybe give us a bit of a flavour of your interview with Martina?
Yeah, sure. So, first we're going to hear from Anja Márjá Nystø Keskitalo. She works as an advisor for the EU unit at the Saami Council. Mm-hmm. And the Saami Council, it's a civil society organization working for Sámi rights in Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Russia. And they are also one of the awardees of our Civic Pride Awards. And then I had also the privilege to have a really insightful conversation with Martina Fjällberg. Mm-hmm. And she's a young Sámi activist living in Sweden.
And what were your impressions of Martina? How did you feel after the interview?
I felt I think it was one of the most interesting conversations I had in a long time. We touched on really many topics, from Sámi rights and indigenous rights and the way of living to colonial legacy and the repression they face, but also the kind of resilience and collective liberation and solidarity inside of the global indigenous movement. Mm-hmm. And actually one of the things that resonated most with my own thoughts and my own background was the issue of climate justice and maybe particularly the lack of climate justice in the case of the Sámi people, because globally they are really... She was talking about this double burden that indigenous people globally face, and especially in terms of the green transition. So they are the ones actually least responsible for biodiversity loss and climate crisis and exploitation of the nature. Yet they are also the most affected of all of these crises. And now in the time of the green transition, it's a new way of kind of colonizing these people, because again, when we are trying to put our societies and change our societies and the energy production in our societies to more green options, we exploit also the indigenous people and we use their lands in a not so nice way and really exploitation and land grabbing. So this was really something interesting that you brought up in the discussion.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Well, why don't we get to it then? So first we're going to hear from Anja Márjá about the Saami Council and then Kerttu's interview with Martina. I hope you enjoy.
Saami Council is a Sámi organization with 9 member organizations in Norway, Sweden, Finland and Russia. And we are working for promoting Sámi rights and indigenous people's rights in general. The organization was founded in 1956 to work for Sámi people's rights and also to create or promote the sense of affinity in the Sámi people. What inspires me most personally is working with people, the feeling of community and the collective action to work for change. People should know about the Sámi people and that we are indigenous people in Europe. We are divided in 4 countries, but we are one people. It's important that people are aware of the rights of indigenous peoples and make sure that there is a space for indigenous people's voices in different contexts. Civil society allies can help us by spread the awareness about the Sami people, especially in the European context, but also indigenous people's rights generally, and help us create the space for indigenous people's voices and also the space for different ways of knowing and different worldviews when we are talking about how our societies should be shaped.
So would you like to start telling me who you are and who are the Sami people, and also give a short introduction to the movement?
Yeah. So my name is Martina Fjällberg. I'm a 24-year-old Sami reindeer herder from Mjärke reindeer herding district in the mid-north of Sweden. And I'm currently studying my master's in geoscience in Umeå. So that's what I do on my spare time. And then I'm also the vice president of the Swedish Sami youth association called Sami Norra. And it's mostly in Sami Norra that I work with, the movement or activism that I do. It's because Sami Norra works a lot with, we work for rights for Sami youth, and then activism is included in this, but we both work with engaging youth as well as working with advocacy and trying to influence politicians and stuff like that. So it's quite a broad organization and what we work with, but the end goal is always to work for Sami youth. And then we have sister organizations in both the Swedish or the Norwegian and the Finnish side as well, but we work in Sweden. And then the Sami people is the only recognized indigenous people in the EU. And we are a people who live in Sweden, Norway, Russia, and Finland. So we are one people in 4 different countries, which makes it quite hard sometimes to work together and feel as one when we have these borders dividing us that we didn't put there. But yeah, and then in the Sami people, we have a lot of connection to nature. So we have both reindeer herders and we have Sami fishermen and gatherers and hunting. Yeah. So it's not, a lot of people think that Sami people are all reindeer herders, which is not true. The reindeer herders are a minority inside the minority as well.
Do you remember when you first became kind of politicized, or you first started to work for Sami issues in a more active way? Was it through Sami Nuora, or was it already before you joined?
Yeah, so I think I've always quite felt a need to fight for the Sami rights in some way. I remember when I was in high school, I think you call it the Swedish version of high school, I often wanted to do when we were supposed to have a speech or practice a speech or anything like that, or write a argumentative article or whatever it was. I always wanted to write about or talk about something to express Sami issues today in different ways, and what struggles we face and stuff like that. But I think the more because that was only in my class and for myself, but I felt when I started in Sami Norra, which I think was in 2018, was when I really felt this is something that I really want to do, because then I was introduced to this great organization that works with Sami youth in so many different ways. And one of the first things I got to do when I joined the board of Sami Norra was to travel to Germany and have tell people about Sami people and how we are affected by climate change. because at that time Saami Nora was a part of this huge we were part of this group that was decided to sue the EU because they violated our human rights because they didn't act on climate change as much as they should have, and in that affected us as a Sami people. So I felt like that was the first time I felt like that this is something really interesting, and then how climate change affects reindeer herding is something that I felt because I'm a reindeer herder myself. I feel like it's something I really want to. I felt like both that it was really interesting because it's so different from how other people are affected by climate change but even as indigenous people are the ones who are affected by climate change the most, but how reindeer herders are in itself a special group and how we are affected. And I think a lot of people don't realize how affected we actually are already today. So that's one of the things I felt most passionate about when I started working with Saami Nord. Like, this is something I want to talk about. It's something I want to do and like spread awareness about.
Yeah, you actually touched already on my next question and on the kind of issues and struggles that you face, mentioning the climate change and climate crisis and how that is increasingly affecting all the indigenous peoples in the world. But could you I don't know, dig deeper into this a bit and tell us about and maybe give some practical examples of the struggles and of the violations, human rights violations that the Sami people are facing?
Yeah, so I think one of the things people don't really realize is that this is about human rights. As an indigenous people, we have certain human rights as an indigenous people, which are often violated in different kinds when you talk about both in climate change is some way, but also in other ways. Like, for example, in Sweden, the Swedish government haven't ratified ILO 169, which recognizes us as an indigenous people, which then creates all these other problems for example, with land rights and we are right to say no to stuff. And this is something that's quite present in Sweden. We have there have been for over 10 years now a continuous discussion or a continuous problem with a mine in around the Jokkmokk area, the Gallop mine, which is basically that there's this mining company that wants to open a mine there, but it's in the middle of this really important reindeer herding area. And if you open up this mine, our rights to practice or like our cultural rights as indigenous people will be violated because we won't be able to do the reindeer herding. That the reindeer herding will be extremely affected by this mine. And now the Swedish government have allowed this mining company to go out and do in the starting process, where they basically examine if we open up this mine, what are the implications that the nature will have if we open it. But I don't think there's anything about what are the implications for the Sami people living in this area if we open this mine. So we're always put aside for these different reasons. And even though it's our cultural land and we are the ones who have been living there for thousands of years and protecting it, we don't have a right to say what's done to it. And it's basically because it's the nature that's affected by these changes are not only just something that we live in, it's something that we live with, because we know nature and respect nature in a different way than a lot of other people do. So that's when if the nature is affected by anything, even if it's climate change or if it's in a mine or whatever, we as indigenous people who are connected to this land, to this nature, will be directly affected as well, because we have this relationship that it's intertwined in a very special way. And you also have I have my cousins on the Norwegian side. They have this is also a really great example on a way that our human rights and our indigenous rights are violated, because there is this huge wind farm in a place called Fosen. And Fosen Vindo is a company that put up these huge wind farms in the middle of the Fosen Fosen-Hjerke reindeer herding district. And now the High Court in Norway have ruled that this wind farm is illegal and should be taken down. But now, even 2 years later, after this the court ruling, the windmills are still standing up. They're still there, still violating the human rights of the indigenous people in Fosen. So it just shows both in the Swedish and the Norwegian side, it just shows almost the lack of respect these governments have towards indigenous people. So even though we are proven right and we have court rulings or whatnot, but we're still the ones who are like put to the side and not listened to, even though we have the law on our side. And it just feels you kind of lose trust to your own government when you feel like that even they don't listen to the rulings of the court or whatnot. Then what's the point with the government if they don't even follow their own rulings?
This is indeed interesting and sad. So sad to hear.
Yeah.
And I think the examples you gave also really shows how in a large scale these, for example, wind park or mines affect the Sami people, because it's not only that they are there and they are affecting the environment that you live, but also affecting the cultural rights and the language rights and really broad scale of human rights that you should be entailed to as indigenous peoples. So it's really sad to see and hear about this. I want to jump into the next question about and connect a bit to the environmental activism, which I know that in many cases they are also allies to you and they support climate activists, support indigenous movements and indigenous activism. Also not in every case, but sometimes this is and if you want, you can elaborate on this. Also critical voices. Just as a context to this, that around in Europe, there's a growing number of laws and of countries passing laws that are, for example, criminalizing environmental activists and passing anti-protest laws and really shrinking the space for environmental and activism in general, vilifying activists, using tactics as, online attacks, police surveillance, tapping of phones. All these things have been seen or have been taking place in Europe against environmental activists. So I wanted to ask you, is this really backlash and criminalization of activism and especially environmental activism, is this something that you have witnessed or experienced yourself or in the Sami youth movement that you are active in?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of some indigenous youth that have, because we are indigenous people are quite passionate about protecting nature, because this is something that's really connected to our culture and our way of life. And when we feel like our governments or whatnot, when they are not listening to us and we feel like we're not being listened to, and then also we don't have the faith or the trust in our government, because as I said before, for example, with the Fosen wind farm, that even though it's proven illegal, the government is still not doing anything. And then you feel like this almost hopelessness, but you feel like I need to do something. And then that's when a lot of indigenous youth feel like the only way to make myself heard is to protest and join these demonstrations. And so I know a lot of Sami youth who has been arrested and have been. When we've been to these protests, we have also we have started to educate ourselves on what we can and cannot do as when we protest and how to be safe, because it's quite scary. We're just trying to say like, listen to us, this is really important, you need to do something. And then the police came and just carried people away. It's quite a dramatic experience. And I feel like a lot of Sámi youth have been a part of this, and like, because even though it's quite dramatic, and you still feel so extremely empowered when you do this, because that's when you really feel like I'm not alone in this, because there's often times when you feel like it doesn't matter what I do, I'm just one people or I'm just one person. But then on these protests and on these demonstrations, there's like just this last fall or like the last year, there were these huge demonstrations in Oslo with some indigenous youth. And it was so powerful, because it just showed how, I don't know how to explain, but it was really like, this is the Sámi youth. You can't really mess with us, because we are quite feisty.
You felt proud being a Sámi,
Yeah, you feel like, for us, I think it's like you feel proud to be a fighter, because but it's also something we have to be fighters, because otherwise we will get like run over. So I think it's something that you have almost you have grown into and grown up with, that you have this fight inside you that's just passed down generational kind of.
This warms my heart to hear, because it's, even though I'm not Sámi myself, but this is something that I also feel really strong, that you people are fighters. Do you think, connected to the police and police actions and how they kind of react to the protests and the ways you protest, do you think there's differences between, for example, like climate movements or some other movements and the Sámi movement? Do you think, for example, police actions are different towards you, or have you witnessed or experienced racism or something different from the police because you are Sámi, like specifically because you are Sámi and you're fighting for the Sámi rights?
Yeah, I definitely think so. We have some good examples in Sweden where there's been a lot of like investigations and whatnot with the police in Sweden, and how they often ignore Sámi people in a way. Like, for example, in the northern part of Sweden, there's a lot of poaching on reindeers, and every reindeer in Sweden is owned by Sámi people, like by a reindeer herder. And there's there have been a large amount of times where a Sámi reindeer herder have reported that one of the reindeers have been poached, and the police have not have one care in the world for whatever it was. Some Sámi people now have felt that they can't trust the police, or they don't want to, because even if you say something, they aren't going to care anyway, because we're Sámi people.
And of course, they have the same state as the police represents, has denied your rights for hundreds of years. So, yeah. I wanted to ask you about, we already touched on the climate issues and kind of how it connects to the lifestyle you have and culture you have. But maybe to take a step back and go more from the historical side, I wanted to ask you about the relationship between colonialism and the colonial legacy of the countries in the north, the Nordic countries, and what's the kind of relationship between the environmental issues and the struggles you face, and then settler colonialism in the Nordics.
Yeah, so this is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about, because it's quite interesting. But I think ever since we as the Sámi people were colonized, we have always been forced to move away from our way of life into this new, more Western way of life. And our way of life is more connected to like protecting and respecting nature, more of us, this Western way have always been about how can we take resources from nature and use it to our advantage as much as possible, to be as efficient as possible or to make as much money as possible. Whereas our way or our relationship to nature have been completely the opposite. Like, the nature is the most important thing there is, and we need to protect it and we need to cherish it because it's giving us life. But one of the things that a lot of people don't really think about today is that colonialism isn't something that's in the past. It's something that's still going on today. But it's you have just changed the name to the green transition. So like a lot of politicians, they talk about we need to have like green energy in the form of like wind farms, or we need to have these we need to find these rare earth minerals. We need to open mines because we need them, because we need a new technology, because we have to have this new technology in order to fight climate change or like battle. We need all these new batteries and whatnot. In order for those technologies to exist, we need the minerals, and especially rare earth minerals. So when the politicians often talk about it and like, yeah, we need, because if we put up this wind farm, it's green energy, it's the thing we need. But if you put it up in the indigenous lands, you're just continuously colonization. It's the continuous of colonization. The colonization haven't stopped, but they still take our lands and use it. But today they can do it with a clear conscience because they can say it's for the green transition. And I feel for me, it's quite hypocritical to say like, yeah, we need to put up these new wind farms and we need to open up these new mines because we need to save the earth. But the only thing you're doing is you're destroying these last bits of protected nature that there is. And you're taking the last bit of, for in Sweden, for example, there's where you want to open these mines and where you want to build these huge wind farms. It's on the reindeer herding lands, which are the only like lands left in Sweden that's almost untouched. And that's the point. That's the nature you want to destroy. So they use their argument in a way that like, yeah, so we need to save nature, but in order to do so, we need to destroy the nature we have left. So I feel like if you continue on down this path, eventually you will stand there like, yeah, now we saved the earth, but what's left to save when you've destroyed everything because you just needed to exploit it even more in order to save it? It feels so contradictory to itself. So today, in Sweden, at least, we talk a lot about something we call the green colonization, because it's the new word that you use, because it's basically what you're doing. Like, you're colonizing our lands, but you're doing it in a way that makes it look good. And it's also really problematic because it's making it easier for new mines to open up or for new wind farms to be built, because it's something that politicians say are needed in order for the green transition. But it still feels a bit like they just found a new way to colonize us yet again and take our rights yet again.
I fully agree. And I think it's important to remember that this green colonization, it's not only something that is happening in the Nordics, for example, but also around the world, globally, with probably all the indigenous peoples around the world are facing this same struggle of green colonization or colonialism, just put into nice words.
It's not something that's like new. It's something that's been going on. And I think like they know what they're doing. That's the thing that I feel so strange. Like they know that they're like trying to make themselves look good, but doing whatever they want. And I feel like, how can you do that with a clear conscience? It feels so wrong for me. But I think maybe that's just the way I was raised. Like, I was raised in a herding community. I know I've been brought up respecting nature. That's why for me it feels so strange to like not do so. And I feel like with indigenous people, it's quite different also, because I feel like we often feel like we have this double burden in a sense, because first of all, we are the ones that contribute the least to climate change and greenhouse gases, and yet we are because we are the ones that live with nature. We are also the ones that are affected first of these environmental changes and these exploitations. And then also, we are also the ones who are paying the price for this green transition. So it's like, there's no climate justice for us as indigenous people. Like, we aren't the ones who should be disaffected by something that we have the least to do with. And it just feels like, because there's a reason why indigenous people protect 80% of the biodiversity in the world. But this also feels like that's not something that's valued in the world today, in a sense that, like, the Western way have always been to try and maximize profit and maximize the expansion. But if you do so, eventually there's nothing left. And I've felt this quite often, that because now when I live in Umeå and study in Umeå, I'm really grateful for that there's close nature to the city, because often when I feel like overwhelmed or I feel like I'm really stressed, I just go out and sit in the woods for a bit, and I just feel so grounded by it. And I think that's something it's in the human nature itself, that we need nature to live, to feel good. So why wouldn't it be the thing that we should protect the most? Because it's something we can't live without. Even as people, indigenous people are different in a sense that we live with nature and protective and have this other relationship. But the human species also need nature to live, because we are still, even though a lot of people have disconnected themselves from nature, it's still something that human needs in their lives. So I feel it's a bit, I don't really understand some of these politicians, how they can just walk around and never be outside, because it feels so great to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I agree on everything you say. And I think in the times we live in, with the climate crisis and biodiversity loss and, all these big environmental changes, I think instead of, violating your rights and making it even harder for the indigenous people to protect those rare places where biodiversity is still huge and growing, I think what we should do as a human species is to, value and give the value to the indigenous people, because you have been doing it for ages and you have been protecting it. And that's like the way of knowing and indigenous knowledge. It's something that is super valuable in our time when we are facing these huge global crisis.
It's something that I also feel quite passionate about, that indigenous people, we have this, because we've been living with nature so long, we know nature in a different way than a lot of other people do. And when you do so, you have this knowledge of how to live with nature in a sustainable way and not exploit nature beyond its limit, in a sense.
I know we are talking about challenges and sad things. So I would like to bring a bit of hope and joy in the end of the discussion. How do you stay resilient? Because as you already told me, Sámi movement and Sámi rights, indigenous rights movement in general, you have fought for your rights for decades, for years, for really long time already. So how do you keep up the hope when we see that the rights of your people are still violated and there's even more crisis, environmental crisis going on? So what's the kind of where do you find the hope and where do you find the resilience to keep on going with the struggle and keep on going with the fight for your rights?
I think it's with most of the, like, a lot of people can agree on, you find comfort in company. So just the thing that you know that I'm not the only indigenous youth who is facing this problem. And when you go to these protests and you organize, like, for example, in Saami, you feel like there's a lot more people who care about the same things that I do than I thought about from the beginning. And then also, I think it's really empowering when I meet and talk to other indigenous youth from other parts around the world, because just because you're indigenous, you almost always have this connection, like this inherent connection with each other, because you're both indigenous and you both have this huge respect and connection to nature. And I could just talk with, like, I have friends from, like, who are Inuit in northern Canada, and you could talk for them for hours because we have the same issues, but like in different colors, if you could say so. And you just feel like this immediate, like, understanding for each other, which is really moving, and it's really so even though I fight for, like, Sámi rights in Sweden or like Sámi rights in general, I still, like, support my other indigenous brothers and sisters, and I know they also support me, which make me feel like there's even more people caring about the same thing, that, like, gives me energy and gives me the power to fight on. And then also, just, I think, as I said before, like, the Sámi people are quite a feisty people, because we have been fighting for our rights for a really long time, and I think it's something that's just in our blood, that we aren't people who easily give up. And it's also really inspiring because my dad's aunt, she was actually the first woman who was president of Saami. And I feel like even though she's in her 80s now, I think, and she's still, like, going to these, like, Sámi meeting and like the Sámi gatherings. Like, yesterday she met the current president of Saami, and I just feel like she's quite an inspiration. And, like, having, like, even though it was quite some time ago when she was active in Saami, that we are still, like, we're still fighting the same fight. It's both sad in a way that we still have to do this, but it still feels like I have, like, ancestors behind me who are also, like, powering me in a way, like, if they could do it, so I can do it as well. I'm not going to give up and waste all their work that they have done. I need to continue to fight for our rights and continue to fight for us, because it's in my blood. I have to do it, because if I don't, it's the survival of my culture and my way of life is threatened if I don't do it. So I think just because it's just the fact that it is so rooted in who I am as a person, it's something that I almost, like, don't even think about. It's just so, like, obvious for me that I have to do this, and I don't. It's just it's almost mandatory in a way for me to continue living.
Yeah. This is super inspiring. I want to ask an additional question on this and on the kind of connections to other indigenous movements. You told me that you have connected, or you can, like, wherever you go in global events, you can kind of connect because the indigenous background you come from, because you face the same struggles as, for example, Inuits in other parts of the world, or whichever indigenous peoples you meet. So can you tell a bit more about the Sámi movement's international connections, and how are you part of a global indigenous movement?
I think it's mostly with because where I have encountered other indigenous youth, it's been on these, like, for example, at the COP meetings, because Saami has been going to these meetings for a couple of years now, and the indigenous presence is quite big on COP. I feel like, at least, but maybe that's just because I am indigenous, so I notice it more than other people. But So I feel like in these like big like meetings and the big like negotiations and stuff, we are always there and like trying to make our voices heard because we need to. But then also we have like there are like different networks and different organizations that Saami Norra has worked with in the past, and you have these like opportunities because we want to do a lot of like collaborations and help each other and do it like these exchanges, because I feel like when you have done like these exchanges with other indigenous people, you really feel like that this is important because everyone feels like this connection and how empowering it is and how like it gives you so much energy. So I feel like everyone has like kind of learned now that this is something we need to continue doing because it strengthens us as people.
Yeah, super inspiring. I would like to go to the last question. That is, what is your vision for a better world?
Yeah, a really big question. But I think for me, I think it's just about giving indigenous people our rights. Because for me, I feel like it would solve so many problems. And as an indigenous people, it's something that I wish for the most, because if we are given our rights, we would be able to conserve and manage the earth in a more healthy way than it's currently doing. And that's, for me, the end goal with everything, that we live in a healthy earth that's not like stripped of its resources. And by giving us our rights and having indigenous people lead conservation work and lead decision makings, I think it will be the one thing that saves nature at last. And trying to like push on all this new technology and having like these rushed decisions we need to quickly make this new super battery or whatnot because it's the way to end climate change. But then there's not actually that much research that's done on anything before it's giving the green light to go. And just like going back to the roots of like indigenous people and going back to our roots as human, as being a part of nature, I think that's really just change the perspective of how we are like living on this planet and what we should be focusing on. And I just wish for more people to kind of realize that and like go into nature and feel that this is the most healing thing we have.
Yeah, I agree. We really need more indigenous voices in decision making and in all levels of decision making processes, on local and national, but also on EU level, for example.
Yeah.
And of course, to really respect the rights of indigenous peoples. Okay, I want to say a huge thank you for the interview. Thank you for the time. At least for me, this was a super interesting conversation, and I learned something new. I hope, or I'm pretty sure that many listeners will also gain some new knowledge and learn something. And I hope you the best and good luck with the studies.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Gitu.
You've been listening to Civic Spaces from the European Civic Forum. This episode was produced and hosted by me, Ben Goodwin. Many thanks to Anja Márjá Nystø Keskitalo and Martina Fjällberg for taking the time to talk with us, and to Kerttu Willamo for carrying out this interview. You can find out more about the Civic Pride Awards in the show notes. See you next time.